I'm prolific, so gifted. I'm the type that's gon' go get it. No kidding. Breaking down a switch in front of your building.
Welcome back to another episode of the Lead Well podcast. My name's Brandon Holland. I am your host. I am BW Holland 32 on most social media outlets. And we have a very special episode planned for you guys today. First of all, thanks for listening. Thanks for your time. And again, we don't run ads. We don't plan on running ads. We are trying to grow this thing organically. And so, the fee is that if you've gotten anything of value from this, just please send it to somebody else and just help us spread the word that way. That's the only way that we're going to grow and continue to helping you grow. And so for today, we have a very special guest, a business owner, a university professor, definitely in that entrepreneurship space, Mr. Corey Pulido. Hey, Corey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. How are things out east so far?
Oh man, I stay busy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's really good. So kind of, what was that, Nipsey hustle?
Yes, sir.
As we come in. Yeah. So yeah, I'm always on that hustle. So, but I kind of operate, I've discovered, not to take over and start speaking right off the bat heavily, but my personality, I operate heavy under high stress or heavy hustle or whatever you want to call it. So I'm busy. I'm real busy, but I like it.
Yeah, and you're running two businesses and being a professor, right?
4 businesses.
4 businesses. Okay. Yeah. So what are
stacking.
The 4 businesses? So I know about the property management. Mm-hmm. And is it rescue dogs that you guys deal with, or
yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, so I'll talk about both of those, but the 4 businesses, we've got property management. That's kind of escalated and grown pretty quick in the last year. Long story short, my mom and dad saw how easy I was making it look. Okay. And so they said, we want a taste of that too. So I had to kind of help them start their own thing. So I'm a partner in that business as well. So I've kind of got 2 property management things that I do.
Okay.
My wife has this side business hustle, if you want to call it that, where we kind of resell consignment goods or refurbished goods. And then the pride and joy, the really big business that we have, because it's in our backyard and we can't escape it, is the animal sanctuary. So we rescue at-risk hound dogs specifically, and they live the remainder of their lives either in our house or on our property somewhere. And we're up to 16 dogs there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, man. So you definitely have to keep a balance and all that, and plus teaching at the university level as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me not forget, I'm a teacher, I'm a husband, I'm a father. Stay busy.
People think I'm busy. Good gracious.
Gosh. Yeah. That's probably the biggest thing. The most difficult thing too is, as much as I'm a believer in grind, I'm a believer in, put your head down and just pick your head up later and kind of reap the rewards. But it gets a little overwhelming sometimes. And we can get a little bit more into it in the deeper part of the episode, but I'm also a believer in personal development more than anything else. So
same here.
Periodically I'll pick my head up, in those times where I just kind of want to see where I'm at. Yeah. And I gotta pump the brakes often, just to be like, okay, well, daughter needs this, or the wife needs this, or you need to get some rest. I pick my head up a lot and just say, all right, let's pump the brakes a little bit. You're doing a lot right now.
And did I see that you're an athlete also?
I work out.
Okay.
I did almost every sport. Obviously I'm 5'5" and 160 right now. So I can only do certain sports, but I did soccer through high school. But a part of that personal development is over the last 5 years, I haven't missed a day of working out to some degree. So whether that's, running 3 miles or, doing 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 air squats, that type of thing. That's one of my key non-negotiables.
Okay.
is,
Yeah.
a body in motion stays in motion is my perspective. So every day I try to check that box to do something very athletic. Now, I'm not an athlete per se, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but my wife would probably say, you stack me up against anybody. I'm a pretty athletic person. So,
Okay. There we go.
but that's just, hard work pays off. So,
Oh, always, always. So you are a professor at ECU, correct?
yes,
And so what classes are you teaching there?
I do an intro to entrepreneurship and business planning class. So, kind of the intro to entrepreneurship is open to everybody. If you're thinking about entrepreneurship, if you want entrepreneurship, but you want to see the beginning of that path, then you come and take my class. And then the business planning class is the capstone. After you've taken a whole bunch of other classes to finish the certificate, you come see me, and we teach you how to put your idea or your potential opportunity on paper to present it to people.
Okay. Now with that intro to entrepreneurship, what are some of the key things that that you're passing along to the students? Are these, I guess, students who are wanting to start their own business or wanting to be an entrepreneur?
Man, I see all walks of life.
Okay.
Um, it I see a combination. I see less of the latter. I
Okay.
think the students who know that they want to be an entrepreneur, they've got their idea and they just need a little reassurance. I think the more of who I see is probably, of course, I'm just fulfilling a class requirement.
Gotcha.
But at the same time, they're just curious to, what is this whole entrepreneurship thing? Like in a teaching setting, what are some of the components that a professor or a teacher would want me to understand? And so I think that's also why they come and take my class. Nine times out of 10, I think the students who come in and see me, they don't know what idea they're working on. They don't know what they want to do in the next 5 years. And that's not to discredit them
Right.
personally, because I joke, but I still don't know what I want to do in a year. Like I
Right.
just have that mentality I love new, and I just love tackling different things, and whatever opportunity is in front of me right now, I'll attack it.
Gotcha.
And um, not that that's where they're at, but they're still an adolescent. They're still young, but they're curious as to what are some of the characteristics of entrepreneurship. And that's why they come and take that first class.
Okay. And I don't want us to get into to the class, because if folks are interested, they need to take the class. But
Yeah.
what's maybe one of the more important components that you stress toward your development of those students?
Well, I'll even give you more than just one. So there's two things that I think are important in terms of not just the class, but anybody listening thinking about entrepreneurship. Um, it's what are the characteristics of an entrepreneur, and then what are the characteristics on opportunities. So there's a
Okay.
difference between the two, and then I'll elaborate on characteristics of an entrepreneur first. Um, in books and teachings, we've discovered, and everybody's going to have their own perspective, but I think overall, what I teach is if we can identify 5 characteristics of an entrepreneur, then we can start to figure out where we have a gap, where
Okay.
we don't have that skill set. And the important thing of doing that is just because you have a gap there doesn't mean that you're never going to be an entrepreneur. Start working on that gap.
Yeah.
Start working on that, lack of a skill set, build it up. And then over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, maybe you fulfill that gap. And now you can go out and be more of an entrepreneur. And even to preface that, most entrepreneurs don't happen until they're 30, 35, 40, 45 anyways. No 20, 25-year-old has the network, has the mental capacity. And this isn't to knock, 20, 25-year-olds. I was there and I was not ready. And most are not ready when they're 20, 21 to 25. They just don't have what they should have to start their own business. But developing the mindset is a good, important characteristic. Knowing how to do more with less is an important characteristic. Most entrepreneurs come to you and say, "Oh, I need $1 million." Well, that sounds good, but how could you accomplish that goal with a lot less? Because people aren't just going to throw you money; just doesn't fall out of trees. So how can we accomplish less, or how can we accomplish more with less? That thinking outside of the box component, analyzing your environment so you can mitigate risk, close that risk window.
Okay.
And then I think the last most important characteristic, this is me personally, is someone who is a doer.
Okay.
So we all have that friend. We all know that person who talks a lot of game, but every year we come back to family barbecue and you're like, "I thought you said you were going to be a real estate agent in the next 5 years and you're going to be making millions of dollars, and you still selling furniture at Ashley's. Like, what's going on?"
Right.
So I think what I've discovered during my journey and what I've discovered through the students around me through their journey, regardless of how great you do, just do. It doesn't matter what you are doing. Just take a step forward. Take a step forward. Take a step forward. It could be the tiniest step. And even failure is a step forward, because now we know what not to do.
Right.
We've made a mistake and we won't do that again. But the fear of taking a step, it's still putting you on that same path. You're not going forward and failing. You're not going forward and succeeding. You're just staying stagnant. And that is a dangerous situation to be in if you're thinking about being an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurs do stuff.
Yeah. This is probably maybe the third time I've heard that in the past maybe week, of just do.
Yeah.
Talking to some mentors and some folks in my network about things such as this podcast and how I should be marketing and things about social media and stuff. And, it came down to just do. And, don't fall into paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
But I want to go back a second. Have you seen a lot of people feel like if they don't start early or earlier in life that they're not going to. Have you seen that sort of discourage people, or do they still keep those dreams alive and then later on develop the skills that are necessary?
Yes, I think there's an advantage to starting early.
Okay.
Are you ready? No, not at all. I think if you're confident and you start early, then you're probably in a good situation. But there's an advantage to starting early, because if you do it in a smart way, you stay humble, you keep your head down, you grind, and you learn as you go, then that path is pretty linear in terms of where you want to be entrepreneurial wise.
Okay.
And you're building your seed instead of, I'm not trying to knock any big business out here, but if I'm moving linear within my career path, there's only so far I can go, and I'm building somebody else's seed.
Oh, exactly.
And so if I start off a lot later, well, yeah, the learning curve is a lot lower because, now I'm 40, 45. I've learned some hard life lessons. I've gained some perspective, which is also very important in terms of entrepreneurship. But my seed isn't starting to grow until now I'm 40, 45. So I think starting off early, as long as you do it smart, definitely gives you a little bit more of an advantage. But at the same time, I think a part of the reason why you see 40, 45-year-olds very successful and start big, uber successful businesses around that age is because, generally we learn things one of two ways. It's an experience that's been thrust upon us uncomfortably, death of a family member, a tragic accident, failing a class, getting kicked out of college. That's a tragic learning experience.
Yeah.
The other alternative is we have a wake up call and we're smart enough to recognize that, and we're put in front of a learning experience. And those two learning experiences, when you're around 40, 45, generally is what sparks that huge, I've got to wake up. I've got to tie everything that I have together. I've got to leverage the network that I've built over the last 20 years. And
Yeah.
now I can start it. And I know what I need to start right now. Again, I don't think there's, it's a very interesting question. I mean, I haven't really thought about it from that perspective,
Mhm.
but I think there's pros and cons to each.
Gotcha.
I think there's pros at starting early if you're ready, but then again, if you're not ready and you take it for granted, now it could set you up for huge failure because maybe you haven't seen failure.
Yeah.
So,
So,
it's same perspective as most CEOs aren't your A students.
okay.
Most CEOs are your C students because they've gotten an F in high school, they've gotten an F in college, and they know how to face adversity.
Okay.
So I think, pros and cons to starting early as long as you're ready, and then pros and cons to starting later. As long as you take it seriously and you have good life experience, then sometimes starting later is more advantageous than starting younger. So it's really just I don't know. I don't know if you could say one is better than the other. That's an interesting question though.
Gotcha. Um, do do people who start later take less risk? I feel like I think they would, but I also feel like, there's a certain risk in just trying to start being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think you'll have outliers, but I think by nature, the older you become, the less riskier you are. Um, now you're digging into retirement. Now you're wanting to spend time with family. I'm probably the riskiest person in our family circle. I now do I go out and bungee jump and do I do all this kind of crazy stuff? No, I mean I'd probably still do it now that we're talking about it, but
Yeah.
um, in terms of business risk, in terms of talking people to think about quitting their job, or talking other family members to get into entrepreneurship, it's not so bad. I'm probably, yes, the riskiest person. And my father-in-law, who's kind of been a mentor to me, or who has been a mentor to me, um, he's still risky because he's been in the entrepreneurial world, but he's definitely, and I see it in my wife, that whole paralysis by analysis, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
She is in my class, I use her as the opposite example of an entrepreneur. Now she's in some of these businesses with me,
Right.
but she is an over analyzer.
Okay.
And her father, my father-in-law, my mentor, he's got that characteristic, and that's where she gets it from. And so I think, you haven't asked this question, but we can dive into it. I think you need both people. I think when you're building a
Okay.
team, when you're trying to start out in terms of entrepreneurship or do your own thing, that person is the riskier person. The other person, if you can get them on your team, checks the boxes for you, makes you pump the brakes just a little bit. Um, Now, would they start a business on their own? Probably not. But are they a good added value to the team? And can you convince them to join your entrepreneurial journey? For sure, if they've got the ambition and you can prove it to them on why it makes sense.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, to answer your question, long-winded way, younger people generally are more riskier. The older you are, I think the less risk you want to take. But I'm about to make this a really long answer. I don't think that always goes in line with entrepreneurship or starting your own business.
Okay.
I think entrepreneurship is way less risky than what the traditional model kind of preaches, right?
Ooh, how so?
So And here's the way that I've always heard it. Let's say ECU, for some reason, this upcoming semester decides that, Corey, this is the last time you'll be teaching. Well, what just happened? I just lost my only source of income. I just lost everything through HR, life insurance, 401k, health insurance. I just lost everything with one swipe of ECU saying, Corey, you're no longer good for business. I completely lost my livelihood. Flip it on the entrepreneurship side. Now, granted, you're probably having to invest your own money. You're having to figure out your 401k and your life insurance. You're having to figure out how to build your team. But if one customer base decides that your t-shirts are no longer for us, your podcast is no longer for us, your revenue stream or your service or your subscription or whatever one thing that they don't like anymore is no longer for us, done correctly, you should still have alternative revenue streams. So if they decide to cancel on you in just one area, that doesn't mean that you're out for business. Now, 90% of all businesses, startup businesses, and I think that has a lot to do with restaurants in general, but 90% of all businesses fail within the first year. And then I think another 50% of the remainder fail within the next 3 years.
Okay.
If you're not the go-getter, if you're okay with failure and you learn from that and then you move forward, someone saying they don't like our shirts, that's not the end of the road, right? There is no plan B. This thing has to work. And you go in with that mentality. So if someone doesn't like one of your revenue streams, adapt.
Okay.
Figure it out. Go attract to other customers or go in a different area. But you didn't lose your entire source of income.
Okay.
I think that's where people get scared. It prevents them from taking the next step. It prevents them from wanting to be entrepreneurial. And it also convinces them they don't need to be in business anymore. And so that's where you see that failure. And then they go back to the big business or big box. And then they get that support, and that support, the 401k, sign-on bonuses. All of those are tools for bigger business to keep you hooked and want to keep you on from preventing you to start your own entrepreneurial journey and fulfilling your own dreams.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a very interesting, it's nice, but you could do this by yourself.
And that on the other side, that's the goal of most people in those businesses or those companies in leadership positions is, how do we keep our people?
Yeah.
And how do we keep them happy? And not knowing, or them not knowing that there's a completely different side of happiness when they're doing the things that they want to do and the things that they're interested in. Yeah.
And I think, I know a part of this is leading. So I think good leadership is supposed to recognize that, and they're supposed to be able to instill some of that within their organization. And if they can't, then shame on them.
Right.
It's a very, very tricky thing. I think the role of a leader is to create more leaders.
Yes.
So it's an understanding that, we love Tom. He's a great employee. He takes initiative. He treats our business like an owner. But if we're training him, Tom won't be here forever unless we can create opportunities within the organization that will want to keep him here for either ever or a very, very, very long time. Like, maybe there's other executive seats at the top that Tom could slide into.
Yeah.
And then it just naturally progresses where Tom will eventually be ahead of one of these seats. If not, well, then we love you, Tom, but you've kind of outgrown us and we want you to go out there and flourish. So it's a unique double-edged sword. But I think, in me trying to build my own business right now, I'm trying to lead that way. Like, how do I create more leaders and keep employees here for as long as I possibly can?
Yeah.
Understanding that they may not be here if I'm doing my job.
Right. And another thing that I'm kind of curious about, as far as risk goes, what's the biggest risk that you've taken and that you've seen success from?
Man, there's a I think right now there's a risk right now. If I'd love to be a reoccurring guest. I'd love to be whatever you want me to do. I love to talk. I love to share what I do. But
Yeah.
my point is, there's something on the horizon that may change this answer in the next 6 months to a year.
Okay.
Can't quite say that yet.
Understood.
But up to right now, I would probably say I've got two risks, one with the nonprofit world and one with the property management world that we have. The first one, my father-in-law inherited a property about 3 years ago. He said, hey, look, if you want to start this thing, this property management thing, I'll support you. I'll be a silent partner. I'll be your bank, but I do not want to touch it. If you're on board, then we can do this thing. And I was just like, well, hey, sounds cool to me. I'm game for anything. Especially when I see there's an opportunity. And I knew I'd been renting out a place for 15 years. I feel comfortable with it. And I said, sure, let's do this thing. Let's build an empire. Well, one of the first things we had to do was we got about a $200,000 loan.
Okay.
I've had a loan close to that amount for, my house, obviously. But in terms of fulfilling, like thinking about it, stepping back and looking at how much money we were getting ready to borrow, and then the money actually came in, and now I had to do stuff with that money, and I had to set up auto payment. I was like, dang, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so, looking at it from a perspective outside of where I was like, dang, that's pretty risky. Like, I understand from the bank's perspective that if this didn't work, I basically owe the bank and I owe somebody $250,000.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. Now, granted, people are doing bigger business than that, but that was the first time that I had a big check like that swiped to me. And I understood the risk that I was taking. And I was like, dang, this is big. From the nonprofit world, I think we're still obviously living in it because, we're not a money generator. But I think the biggest risk we took was kind of twofold. One was going through the cancer journey with our dog, so understanding the financial burden it was going to take. My wife and I were on board for that. Didn't have our daughter yet. We knew that was going to be tough, personally, mentally, financially. And we signed up and said, let's do this. The second thing was, about halfway through that battle, about a year later, the next biggest risk was, let's start this nonprofit. Because my mentality was, with a regular business, you need to prove validity. You need to prove viability, that you can replicate this business and prove it to your customers and your stakeholders.
Right.
I wasn't selling anything.
Okay.
So from a nonprofit's perspective, I didn't have a huge donor yet, but I said, you know what, like, let me put my money literally where my mouth is. And we took out a huge loan to buy the building and buy a bunch of the supplies that we thought we needed, at least to start. And then when we had that, I started talking to donors, and I could say, hey, look, I've got some skin in the game. Like, I'm serious about this. I'm not just talking about a very cool idea that I have. Like, I have 3 or 4 dogs in this building. I need funds. I need support. Let's start talking. Let's start moving forward. How can we get the fence? How can we get this? How can we get that? That was a huge risk, not knowing if it was going to pan out, because if it didn't pan out, then basically I just, bought a $20,000 to $30,000 building hoping it would work.
Right.
And that's not really what you want.
Okay. Wow. So, what's one of the most important things you've learned when starting your own businesses?
Man, and a lot of this, it's kind of crazy because a lot of this I talk to my students about.
Yeah.
And it's like, I've been reading it in a book, trying to be, on the professor side, and you need to do this, you need to do that. And then half the time I'm going through some of that stuff on my own. So, one of the examples is I always tell my students, look for failure, look for difficult opportunities. On the opposite end of adversity is greatness. And so, I'm a big believer, and I try to work on my mindset. So when I'm in the middle of adversity, for the most part, it's like a 50-50 chance where I'm like, okay, I recognize this is tough. Something great is going to come out of it. And so rather than like hating being in the situation, it's almost like I'm almost, as I'm describing it now, I feel like I'm crazy, but as I'm in the middle of adversity, I'm like, yes, bring it on. Like,
Oh yeah.
I know this stinks right now, but something positive is going to happen. And so like, I'm enjoying that toughness or that loss or that difficult time.
Yeah.
And that's probably what I go through right now, what I've taught my students, and kind of one of the biggest things I think that I've learned from as I struggle, as I lose things, as I mess things up, just trying to constantly remind myself, even in the lowest of lows, okay, pick your head up. Something is going to be positive on the other end. Just remember that this sucks temporarily, but you're going to learn from this, and it's okay. Like, it's
Yeah.
not that. I think that's one thing too that we have to remember. Wannabe entrepreneurs have to remember, it's not the end of the world. Like, people have gone through worse. Other successful people have gone through worse. So just take that into perspective and just keep moving forward.
Yeah, dude, I'm definitely a firm believer in that, because when the adversity comes, it definitely sucks at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I like to be of the mindset that this is creating me or turning me into the person that I need to be for what's next.
Yeah.
And there's certain skills and certain things that you wouldn't have developed and you wouldn't have learned if you didn't go through adversity. And if you're always winning,
Yeah.
you don't learn, you don't learn where you need to develop more and where you could be better.
Yeah. I mean, it's like that kid, no offense to him, kudos to his parents to being a millionaire, but that kid who's got that Mercedes Benz at 16 years old,
Yeah.
you don't appreciate it. You
Right.
didn't work for it. You don't get up at 6 o'clock. So you don't have that hard work effort. Like I'm, but it's also very difficult. Um, I'm also at a point in my life right now, as I said, I really try to work on personal development. I also don't hate that kid for having that car anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah.
At 16, 17, 18 years old, you were envious, lucky him. Well, then work hard.
Yeah.
Well, then you get in a position to have all that stuff. Don't worry about him, because the time that you're spending worrying about that person is taking time away from you being able to do anything else that's on your path to success.
Yeah.
So I have no time to worry about that, to envy that. I've got my head down. I'm focused. I've got some goals. I've got some missions. I've got some visions. And just if it doesn't align with it, don't worry about it. And
Yeah.
you can't control things that are outside of your control. So why
Right.
worry about any of that stuff anyways?
Yeah. Yeah. We got to control what we can control.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it. So real quick, before we kind of get ready to close out, as far as leadership goes, and in the entrepreneurship space, what have you seen that's important from a leadership standpoint, for an entrepreneur, for somebody taking that risk and starting their own thing?
Elaborate on. I could take that. My head spinning in about 50 different direct, just because I put so much thought into that type of stuff, like leadership, how I want to lead, what
Well,
I
let me
look for in leaders, all that kind
ask
of
this:
stuff.
how do you lead?
Well, I'm not, obviously I'm always working on that.
Yeah.
And I don't have paid employees yet.
Okay.
I'm actually on the precipice of trying to accomplish that goal within the next year or two. I'm just trying to, align all those things. But I've always been a believer in, one, lead by example. And through example, I mean, literally getting my hands dirty, blood, sweat, tears, all that type of stuff. And I also think, you have to lead with a vision. And it's really hard to do sometimes. We get caught up in the daily hustle and bustle, and so we forget sometimes. And what I mean by vision is not only having like where you want to be,
Right.
but also where you want to be that aligns up with doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, regardless of whoever's looking.
Yeah. Okay.
And some of those things are harder said than done. And, I really try to work on a lot of those things. One example is, I periodically, and this may sound cheesy, but I really try to act on this, about once a year, I'll have a conversation with myself, literally in the mirror. And no, I'm not crazy, but I'll look at myself in the mirror and just kind of be like, is this who I wanted to be? Is this where I want to be? And if where I want to be isn't the Corey today, what do I need to work on to make sure that it aligns with that person?
Gotcha.
Right? If I want to be Kevin Hart, and in the next 5 years or next 10 years, have 10 movies out there, set logical goals, and, tour the United States and do all these crazy things. Well, working out every day, this property management company, a lot of these things probably don't make sense. Let's start checking them off. And I think as long as you have, for the most part, a good vision and you lead by example and you do it consistently, regardless of whether or not people are looking, because people watch.
Yeah.
And I'm a very big people watcher. So, when people think you're not looking, I like to kind of peer and just see what other people are doing, just out of curiosity. But they'll mock you. What is it? Mocking is the hugest form of flattery. So,
yeah.
They'll just assume, especially like in a culture, they'll act on what I'm doing and the way that I act because they assume that it's the norm. And I do want that to be the norm. That's also why I'm excited about, hopefully trying to bring in, employees and trying to practice what I preach. I say a lot of these things, but it definitely is going to be different when I'm wearing the shoes.
Yeah.
I want to create a culture within my organization that you don't see often. I want people to be excited to come to work. I want to come to work. I want people to want to work 50, 40 hours. I want to give opportunities to volunteer, bring your family to work day. I want a gym in the office. Like I want all of these cool, magical things. And I'm excited to see over the next 2, 3, 5 years, how I make this happen. Not if I make it happen, but there are always ways, just like the entrepreneurial mindset. We're going to be hit with a wall. How do we get over it? How do we get around it? How do we still accomplish it, even though the answer is no?
Right.
So I know I'm going to get a lot of pushback, even from myself, but I believe it's possible and it's important. And so I'm curious to see, not only can I lead by an example, but can I lead when I actually have employees in the door, when they see me day to day?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree 100%. I'm interested to see what happens for you over the next year or so, because you've got some big plans and definitely have the drive to accomplish it. So
Thank you.
that's awesome. That's awesome. Anything else before we close out?
Oh, there's so much. Yeah, I could talk and talk and talk and talk. So maybe if you enjoyed this, and if anybody else enjoyed it, then maybe we can have me back some more to share. I've got a lot of stories.
Yeah.
A lot of stories.
So how can our listeners find your business? Do you guys have a website or anything? Or
We do have we have our property management website, but the
Okay.
the big one that we promote is the nonprofit that we have, Scarlet Oak Farms. So check us out there, Scarlet Oak Farms. We've got every social media content thing you can think of, well, except Twitter. But Instagram, Facebook, we're on YouTube, we're on Apple Podcasts because we have our own podcast too, Rough Around the Edges. Any channel that you can think of to donate, we're on it. Patreon, we're even on Amazon Smile. So
Awesome.
if you shop on Amazon, you just click through the nonprofit, and every percentage of your purchase goes to our nonprofit, which is always huge. So if you can be out there, we're trying to be out there.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thanks for being on the show, and to our listeners, if you're interested and if you'd like to donate, definitely hit up Scarlet Oak Farms. And this has been Brandon Holland and Corey Pulido. Thanks.
Thank you.